I get this set up. The first part of what I want to do is just open up a time in case anybody had any additional thoughts or comments from last Sunday when we talked about the first section of the 6 antitheses. We covered anger, lust, and divorce, all three very big topics, and we had very little time to talk about all three. So I just want to give a little bit of time as I do the recap, if anybody had additional thoughts there, so you can be thinking about that as I pull this up. Okay, so last week we were talking about, again, these are called the 6 antitheses, and they're essentially come right after the section in the Sermon on the Mount when Jesus is talking about, I have not come to abolish the law and prophets, but I have come to fulfill them. And he's kind of bringing out these 6 examples of what that looks like in the new kingdom, how he's kind of revealing the truth beneath the law of Moses and bringing about those things in himself. So, again, a reminder that the pattern is, you have heard that it was said, but I say to you. It goes through each of these 6. It varies slightly by how it appears, but it's similar to that, follows that pattern. And Jesus uses these, like I said, to illustrate how he's completing or fulfilling the law. And we looked at those 3 examples: anger, lust, divorce. And last week I kind of had a key point that I brought out that was kind of through all 3 of them. I decided that I was going to direct quote from the Bible Project because I like their definition a little bit more than what I wrote last week. And it's essentially that God defines doing righteousness or acting rightly as treating all humans with dignity because we are all made in the image of God. And I kind of like how you can see that thread through all of the first 3 when Jesus is talking about anger. It's not only about murder, but it's about devaluing people in our minds through our anger. Like, how much do we value another person's life? Are we devaluing them through our anger, through angry thoughts that we think, through name calling, through those kinds of things? And then lust, it's not only about adultery. It's about reducing other people to objects for our own sexual gratification. And then there's divorce, where it's Jesus saying that it's not divorce for any reason, like many of the scholars were saying, but Jesus is pointing out the importance and the criticality of the marriage covenant and protecting women on a large scale from abuses in the culture around the divorce laws. So before we jump into the next 3, just want to open it up for a chance if anybody had any additional thoughts or questions. I know there was questions brought up last week that didn't get answered, and I'm sorry that I can't answer all those questions. Some of those questions will just remain questions, and we can keep thinking and wrestling with them. But if anybody else had additional thoughts that as you were studying or thinking about it this week, now's your chance. I'll just give a little bit of time here.
I wasn't here obviously last week. The rabbinical teachings on this from rabbinical scholars, everybody kind of admits, even who's Jewish, there were a lot of abuses at the time. because you were allowed to divorce your wife if she
Mhm.
chose. That was actually one of the teachings that was circulating at the time. And so Jesus was probably up to here with it, because the legalism had gotten so into hair splitting that they
Yeah.
decided whether to correctly make breakfast.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a good point. Yeah, and I think we'll touch on that again today at the end of the 6 antitheses, where I think it ties into Jesus's main point here with the 6 things that he brings out. Thanks for that. Yeah, if you guys want to, you can either look at the passages on the screen or pull out your Bible and follow along, whichever works better for you. So we're starting in Matthew 5, verses 33 through 48 is what we're going to cover today. So the first section is on oaths. So I'm going to read it, and then what I'm going to do this time is, instead of sharing my thoughts up front, I'm going to actually just read the text and then open it up for a chance for people to share any thoughts that they have. Just face value reading of the text. What comes to mind? What are you thinking? And then I have some things that I'll fill in at the end. So let's read it. Matthew 5:33 through 37. Again, you have heard that the ancients were told, "You shall not make false vows, but shall fulfill your vows to the Lord." But I say to you, take no oath at all, neither by heaven, for it is the throne of God, nor by the earth, for it is the footstool of his feet, nor by Jerusalem, for it is the city of the great King. Nor shall you take an oath by your head, for you cannot make a single hair white or black. But make sure your statement is yes, yes, or no, no. Anything beyond this is of evil origin. And this Bible translation, if yours says anything different, is the NASB. So you might have slightly varying translations there. So any thoughts, face value, reading the text, or from your study this week if you were studying it? Mm-hmm. Yeah. What is an oath? So I think a core idea that Jesus is getting at here is, at the time, the idea of making oaths was being abused, and essentially there was this very strict rendering of it, where as long as you made a vow but it wasn't by God himself, then there was a lot of loopholes, essentially. So you could, an example, he kind of gives 3 examples later on in the text of what those loopholes might be for people. And I think that's what Jesus is responding to, that if you didn't swear specifically by God, that you didn't have to keep that oath.
A lot in this passage is confusing for me.
Mm-hmm.
The logic behind why you swear by something. For it is the throne of God. Especially verse 36. Don't swear by your head.
Yeah.
Because it's not active or something like that.
Yeah.
You can't make your hair. I was confused by the logic.
Yeah.
I'm also confused by why you don't swear by your head.
Yeah.
Is it like swearing by your body?
Yeah. It's a good question. I don't know if any other translations would say anything different. I didn't look at it actually, so. Yeah. Could be that.
This is the one that, like, all the different teachings here, I feel this is the one that is the hardest one for me to kind of, it feels like it has almost no bearing on my life, or very,
Sure.
very
Yeah.
stuff that happened, where I even like asked to swear to it. It's like maybe one time I feel like be a witness or something, and then you're
Yeah.
that's the but digging into this a bit, trying to figure out why this is such a big deal. The thing I've learned is that, since our society is quite a bit more like ordered than than any other time in history, really. It means that if you are running a business and someone cheats you, you have a recourse to take. Like, you have just things you can do. Eventually, you can sue someone if you want to, or whatever. Like, there's things you can do, and so it means that you don't actually have to swear oaths nearly as much as people, especially like in, let's say, medieval Europe or in ancient times. People swore oaths to each other a lot, and the idea was, if I don't fulfill this, not that some court was going to make me do it, but that the God or whatever that you're swearing by is going to come and make me.
Yeah.
Like swear that I will deliver the food, barrels of fish oil to you, or God will not step.
Mm-hmm.
And like a lot of contracts, things like that, made by swearing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Kind of like to the original people who heard it throughout history, it's meant way more than this to us now.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think you're right. That's a really good point to bring out. The cultural context of the audience that Jesus was speaking to here would have understood this in a very different way than we would have, because I think we typically think of this in a court case scenario, like you said, where we can, the typical reading of it is that not taking an oath in court. In the what? Yeah. Yeah, it could be. I don't know that I specifically saw anything, but yeah, that's a good point.
Last year, we typically, we have this thing, you swear or affirm when we're doing that. That's what we say, we'll swear or affirm. But you said anything beyond yes or no is a legal word. I guess that would include affirmation as well.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, a couple things that I wanted to bring out, and most of these are just my thoughts. These are not emphatic statements about this, but kind of where I came to in looking at this is essentially with Jesus, with his point being that there was too many loopholes in this system of making oaths to people, and it was getting abused to where people were getting taken advantage of when oaths were being made on something that wasn't directly God, and then they took advantage of that by saying, hey, it's not directly by God, so I don't have to keep it, right? There's no enforcement there. And kind of the way I read it was that essentially all these different things, the head one is a really good question, because I feel like that kind of falls outside of the way I was thinking, but essentially all of these things are related to God and connected to God. Like everything in the earth, the temple, like everything that you could swear by is God's creation, directly related to God, and therefore is an oath under God. And kind of this idea that you can't really swear by anything that isn't connected to God, and therefore all oaths are binding. And the idea that for Christians of the new covenant, the importance here was integrity, being people that didn't require this system of oath making in order to be people that could be trusted. And I think that's kind of one of the key points here is in let your yes be yes and your no be no, is that when we say things, we should mean them. We should be trustworthy. So yeah, I think Jesus says this instead, that we should simply be people of integrity ruled by love and a deep commitment to truth. I also think it's interesting, I just came across this morning when I was doing some more studying, is that Paul seemed to make oaths in Romans, 2 Corinthians, Galatians, 1 Thessalonians. He says all these things like, I'm blanking on the exact, let me see if I can pull it up. Wrong screen. Something, there's 4 different passages here. Let me see. So one example is Romans 1:9, where he says, "For God is my witness, whom I serve with my spirit in the gospel of his Son, that without ceasing I make mention of you always in my prayers. Moreover, I call God as witness against my soul that to spare you I came no more to Corinth." Galatians 1:2. "Now concerning the things which I write to you, indeed before God I do not lie." 1 Thessalonians, "For neither at any time did we use flattering words, as you know, nor cloak for covetousness. God is my witness." So I found that interesting. I had never really come across those passages. There was a couple commentaries that were talking about that as kind of the, if you take the interpretation that you can't swear oaths, this was kind of their counter to that. So I found that interesting. And then lastly, I just have this quote, which I think ties in with what you were saying, is it's from a theologian called Barclay, and he said, "The truly good man will never need to take an oath. The truth of his sayings and the reality of his promises need no such guarantee. But the fact that oaths are still sometimes necessary is the proof that men are not good men and that this is not a good world." And I think I liked that really succinct interpretation of just like the necessity of this system, and even the system of like contracts, and is because at the core people are broken and people don't keep their promises. So let's move on to the next section here. Forbearance, verses 38 through 42. "You have heard that it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I say to you, do not show opposition against an evil person, but whoever slaps you on your right cheek, turn the other toward him also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your tunic, let him have your cloak also. Give to him who asks of you, and do not turn away from him who wants to borrow from you." So I think the crazy thing right off the bat is with all of these sections, you just have so much packed into a short paragraph, where they put these headings on this text, but it doesn't always feel like everything fits under those headings, and those headings weren't in the original scripture too, so it makes it interesting to think about how they would have interacted, how the author would have signified the significance of some of these different statements. Any thoughts as you read this? Things that stand out to you? I think these next 2 sections are actually probably some of the most quoted and remembered parts of the Sermon on the Mount when we talk about non-resistance and enemy love. Yeah.
So they have like a low bar. So they have to use stuff that has a lot of weight to it. Christians, our yes should be yes, but we should back out of stuff. So it should be obvious that we're going to say the truth or do the right thing in business.
Yeah.
And then I don't really want to say much on this. This is so important to the Anabaptist
Yeah.
idea of non-resistance. So
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
People to take their
Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a great point. I found that as well for the first time studying for this section, that cultural context that they would have understand. I wasn't able to like find any direct sources that claimed it was true, and some of these things a lot of people quote, and you don't know how far it goes back, but I do think it sounds legitimate at least, and it lends a lot of like clarity to what he might be saying here.
where it talks about slapping specifically on the right cheek.
Mm-hmm.
Apparently, maybe there's some cultural differences in that too, and I know there was a punishing
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
society, and so when someone would like hit you on your right cheek, it was like it maybe wasn't as shameful as if the person would hit you then on their left cheek, because like using generally your right hand to hit someone's right cheek, you would then have them turn their face towards you the other way. You would then hit them with the back of your hand, and then that was way more shameful to them.
Okay.
Like,
Yeah.
that you felt that, or how you feel about
Yeah.
it.
I did actually see a couple of people talk about, and I think it's actually the opposite way of like if, since in their cultural context, left hands would have been for dirty things and right hands would have been for clean things, and they're saying sorry, I did those opposite, but if you would have struck someone on the right cheek, it would have been with the back of the hand. And I also was not able to corroborate any of this, so this is kind of theories at this point, but what they were saying is actually, I saw one person say that there was actually heavy fines because of how insulting it was to slap someone on with the back of the hand. There was actually heavy fines imposed for people who did this to other people in the Jewish culture, and because of it was degrading. That's what I read. And then if you turn the cheek, they would have to slap you with an open palm, which was associated with more of a like equal to equal, so kind of dignifying action. So yeah, I did read that as well. That's a good thing to bring out. I think something that I also want to highlight is if we're talking about non-retaliation and name calling and just kind of being in that position, Jesus experienced a lot of name calling during his ministry, and he was a really good example of that. Some of the things that he was called, like glutton, drunkard, illegitimate child, blasphemer, madman. Can think about the feelings that you would feel being called things like that. And for Jesus, his reaction was always peaceful. His reaction was always responding with love.
I feel like this is it's an easy concept to like generally agree with. But like the idea of not posting at all.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard. And so to wrestle with like what does that look like in real life?
Yeah.
What does it look like to protect people or to fight against the things that's happening? This feels hard for like many people.
Yeah. I think that's probably my primary wrestling when it comes to this passage too, is just, there's a lot of different interpretations as to how far this doctrine of non-retaliation goes. Does it extend beyond this kind of injustice into also like violence against, say, your family members? Is that something, does it go as far as that? Or is it just something related to this dignity question of like someone insulting you and not fighting back? How far does it go? It's a good question. And I think we need to wrestle with that. And I think, as Toby and Melvin have both mentioned when we go through the Sermon on the Mount, I think one of the key things here is that it's not clear, and we are supposed to continue wrestling with it. And that's why I think it's important to keep coming back to passages like this and wrestling with these questions, because throughout life, we encountered situations where these kinds of things become real for us. And coming back to these passages and just reminding ourselves of the way that Jesus approached life and the way that he thought about these commandments, the Old Testament, God's law, and the kingdom of God in this new sense are really key. Yep.
Maybe this is stretching the story a little bit, but looking at stories of Jesus, like you said here, he may whip and throw out who were in a way shaming his father, or at least his father's stuff. I think well that there's a very strong possibility that this is talking about things against us personally, and not necessarily an inability to defend our family from somebody who's harmful. I would see that. Personally, I would see that.
Yeah. And I have no idea where I land on that yet. But yeah, I think that's a good point. And I think it's part of the wrestling of this passage.
Exposed where
Okay. I don't have any. Yeah.
but I certainly will. Whatever.
Yeah.
That's reasonable.
Yeah.
Like that. That's kind of
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's and I think it's really also quite interesting to think about this in the context of like Jesus's perspective on anger, and just how he connects that to essentially valuing or treating other people with dignity or their lives as valuable, and essentially not taking that into our own hands and devaluing another human's life through taking it. And so they think that's a key that doesn't necessarily give you a concrete answer on whether or not you can defend yourself, but it does at least say that going to the length of devaluing another human's life to the point of murder is wrong. So yeah, it's good. Thank you for sharing. Yeah. Yep. Yeah. Yeah. It's a good question. And I do wonder too, I didn't get a chance to study this in depth, but just the cultural context around borrowing, if it would have had a different significance to what we maybe think of it now. I was looking at some Old Testament stuff around like giving your garment or your cloak in a pledge and that it should be returned, and some other things like that, where I feel like to them, especially some of their possessions would have been of much more value. Like a cloak might have been of much more value to them than it is to us now, with mass manufactured garments and that kind of thing. Their cloaks were probably handmade and maybe took multiple months to produce, and they had a significant amount of value. And so for them, this would have been a much bigger sacrifice to let someone borrow your ox, which you need to use to plow your field. Like what would have been the significance of that in their context? And yeah, it's a good question. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, well, we're running out of time, so let's jump to the last section. So love, this is a somewhat similar section, but he has some really interesting things to say here. Any thoughts? Actually, let me read the passage first. Matthew 5:43 through 48. You have heard that it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you, so that you may prove yourselves to be sons of your Father who is in heaven. For he causes his sun to rise on the evil and the good, and sends rain on the righteous and the unrighteous. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Even the tax collectors, do they not do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what more are you doing than others? Even the Gentiles, do they not do the same? Therefore, you shall be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. Ends on a pretty heavy note there. Any thoughts?
That you lose all yourself.
Mm.
No selfish motive that spurs on the best kind of charity work, or laying down your life for a friend. Because like when you get a rush of good feelings from helping somebody, in a way that's your motivator. You know what I mean? Like if this person's super nice to you, you feel really good sharing, something good you have with them. But if a person has wronged you, or you have no connection whatsoever, then there is really a lack of that ties. I mean, you're doing it out of obedience, right?
Yeah.
And so, like, selfless love is the highest form of that's agape. So, this ties into what Paul know.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like it says here, it's easier to love your brothers and sisters than it is to love your neighbor or your enemy, especially your enemy. Yeah. Yeah. Treating them with dignity. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, well, we're past time, so I'll just share a few thoughts in conclusion. And I do think that this passage is really critical, and I might actually open up a little time in next week's Sunday school for people to share any additional thoughts that they have on this section. So you can be thinking about it, and I'll open that up next Sunday since we didn't get into this in depth. But a couple things I just want to share is that last section, I think, the last verse 48, is really significant in that I think essentially Jesus is laying out in these 6 antitheses, like if you are trying to be perfect by the standard of the law, these are the things that you need to live up to. Like, this is who you need to be. And if you can't be up to this standard, then you're not going to surpass the righteousness of the scribes and the Pharisees. You're not going to make it. Like, this is the standard. And I think what he's pointing to is, I mean, really, there was only one person who ever satisfied that standard, and it was Jesus. And that's how he fulfilled the law and the prophets, by being the perfect example of these things. And I think it's significant in that he's pointing to, even though we are broken humanity, through faith in Jesus Christ, we have this opportunity to enter into this beautiful relationship with Jesus. And as we grow in our relationship with Jesus, these character traits are things that we aspire to, but we may not ever reach perfectly. But they're important to us as Christians. So I think Jesus is calling his believers to a higher standard, while also pointing out the impossibility of keeping the law as broken humans. And I think that was what he was talking about earlier when he says that he didn't come to abolish it, but to fulfill it, because there was only ever one person who was able to live up to the standard of the law. And he's also highlighting these key traits of love, forbearance, integrity, and peace. So that's what we have for today. And thanks for your participation. It was great. And I will be opening it up again. Next week, we go into Matthew 6, but I'm going to open it up a little bit at the beginning for you to share any additional thoughts you have on this last section here in Matthew 5, because I think it's really important.